Greetings, fellow Tarnished. Rurikhan here coming at you with another video. Welcome back to Elden Ring, and today I'm going to be bringing you a beginner's guide for your journey into the lands between. Whether you're someone who's jumping into Elden Ring as your very first Souls-like experience, or if you're a hardened veteran of the Souls franchise and you're just looking to get caught up on some of the Elden Ring specific mechanics, this video is going to have you covered. There's also not going to be any spoilers of any kind present in the video. I am going to be showing you a little bit of gameplay of the Limgrave area just so that you guys can see maybe a little bit of the combat, maybe a little bit of a couple of specific mechanics, but I'm not going to be showing you specific things like loot or boss fights or even slightly different enemies that you'll be able to find throughout the world. Okay, it's going to be very minimalistic and very heavy on explaining mechanics and focusing also on revealing as little as possible of the game. And we start our journey by helping you choose which class is right for you, which is the best starting class that you can pick for the playstyle that you want to have. However, before we get to that, we're going to have to tackle the stats. And the reasoning behind it is because the stats are going to be important for the playstyle that you are going to choose. So if you look here, you can see the stats on all of the base classes. Now I'll explain to you what each of these stats is. So the first stat you got over there is Vigor, which basically decides how much hit points you're going to have, how much is going to be your fire resistance, as well as your immunity stat, which, by the way, the immunity stat governs your resistance to poison and rot. So hit points, fire resistance, poison resistance, and rot resistance. Rot, by the way, I think it's just a different kind of poison. I might have not even experienced it yet at this point in the game. Your next stat is going to be Mind. Mind decides how much FP you have available to you. FP is called, I think it's focus points. I'm not exactly sure what the translation is, but either way, FP is basically your mana. It's your blue gauge. So the more you have in Mind, the more spells you will be able to cast, not memorize. Okay, it's different. You don't get more spell slots for putting more points into Mind. You just get a bigger pool of FP that allows you to cast those spells more times. And not just spells, it also is going to be used for stuff like Ashes of War. So the more Mind you have, the more Ashes of War you'll be able to use. So, you know, the special attacks of your weapons and stuff like that. It also affects Focus, which is your resistance to sleep and resistance to madness. Madness being a new ailment stat that is in the game, which sometimes happens when you cast spells and sometimes happens when you get hit by certain spells or certain attacks from certain monsters. So that is going to be what Mind does. Then you have Endurance, and Endurance does a lot of things. So it decides how much stamina you have, which is the green gauge in your character. It also decides your robustness, which is your resistance to bleeding and frost damage. It decides your equipment load. So the more endurance you have, the bigger armor you'll be able to equip while still rolling at a decent pace. It also is going to allow you to equip like beefier weapons and stuff like that, right? Basically heavier things. The more endurance you have, the more heavier equipment you'll be able to equip. So if you want beefy, heavy armor, you're going to be dumping a lot of points into this particular stat. Then you got Strength. Strength affects your ability to equip, heavy weapons. Certain heavier weapons are going to require a certain amount of strength. It also affects the damage that you do with strength scaling weapons. We'll talk more about scaling a little bit further in the video for those of you that don't know about that. And before I did the research for this video, I was not aware of this, but it also affects your physical defense, which is cool. Then you got Dexterity. Dexterity is basically required for what they consider to be advanced weapons, but it's basically weapons that require a higher dexterity stat. It also increases the damage of weapons that scale off of dexterity. It also gives you faster cast time on spells, although I believe that this effect is very minimal, but I haven't casted a lot of spells because I'm playing a strength build at the moment. It also lessens the amount of fall damage you receive if you fall from too greater height, but I think that this is a very minor thing because basically you can judge height distance and like, I can survive this fall or I can die from this fall. And I think what Dexterity does is the falls you can survive, you might take a little bit less damage, but the falls from which you would die, I don't think that's going to change much. It also makes it harder for you to get knocked off of your horse. So Dexterity gets a lot of bonuses straight off the bat. I think it's one of the stats that give you the most things possible. So if you're running a dexterity build, you get a lot of quality of life things added on there. Then you got intelligence. Intelligence is also obviously the stat that governs like spell casting and stuff like that. In this game, it's called glintstone sorceries. It also affects anything that scales off of intelligence, which there's several sorceries that scale off of intelligence. I believe most of them. There also might be weapons that scale off of intelligence, or even weapons that you modify through Ashes of War, which will begin scaling with intelligence after you modify them. So, you know, this is just something to keep in mind, that Ashes of War can also change that stuff. It also governs your magic resistance. So a higher level of intelligence is going to make it so that you take less damage from spells. Then you got Faith. Faith governs Incantations, which is basically the name for miracles in this game. If you've played previous Souls games, you know what these are. But Incantations this time are not just like based around holy miracles and stuff like that. There are some different types of incantations. So yeah, I'm gonna leave you guys to explore that for yourselves, because like I said, I don't want to get into too much spoiler territory. But naturally, Faith is also going to affect anything that scales off of Faith damage. So you can also change weapons to potentially scale off of Faith. There will be weapons that you just find that scale off of Faith. So there's that. Then you have Arcane. Now Arcane governs Discovery, which is basically like your magic find. It also governs your holy defense, which is your resistance to holy spells and holy damage. Governs your vitality, which is a stat that governs instant death resistance, which I suspect is going to be some type of ailment, kind of like curse, which I haven't encountered yet. I'm only 20 hours in at this point. It might also affect certain sorceries and incantations, so there might be some spells or incantations that you find throughout the world that will actually scale off of Arcane as well. So a very interesting stat to have, but now you know what each of the stat does. And for those of you that are curious about memory slots, which by the way are what allows you to equip more or less spells. So say for instance you find 3 spells in the game, but you only have 2 memory slots, you're only going to be able to equip 2 of those spells. And you know, the way that memory slots work in this game is they're not tied to any one stat. They're simply a mechanic that you unlock as you progress through the game. And that's all I'm going to tell you guys to prevent any further spoilers. So now let's talk about your starting class. Starting us off, we have the Vagabond here, which is going to be starting at level 9 with 15 Vigor, 10 Mind, 11 Endurance, 14 Strength, 13 Dexterity, 9 Intelligence, 9 Faith, and 7 Arcane. This is obviously going to be your kind of like default melee character. It's got around quality level attributes with decent strength, decent dexterity, and it's going to be starting off with some pretty beefy armor. I think it's the heaviest armor of any starting class. It also comes with a shield, a halberd, and a sword, thus giving you some variety in the weapons that you can use at the start of the game. This is very good if you're trying to focus mostly on a well-rounded melee build. Then you have the Warrior coming in at level 8, and looking at the stat distribution there, you can see that it is focusing mostly on dexterity. I believe that the weapons that the Warrior is sporting will most likely scale off of that dexterity. So this is mostly going to be a dexterous fighter. It is built around the idea of dual wielding very early on into the game because it comes with 2 swords. It also comes with a shield that can be used for parrying. Not as good for blocking, but still, you know, it's going to be a class that if you want to start off by just dual wielding, this is the class to do it at, and I will talk more about dual wielding further in this video. Then you got the Hero. This is kind of like your default strength-based character. Starts with an axe and a shield, and it's got a decent amount of vigor, so good HP, as well as good amount of strength. Not too much dexterity. So that means that potentially if you start with this class, you might have to pump a couple of points in dexterity, and obviously low intelligence and faith because it is a melee-focused class. It's basically your strength build default startup, which is the one that I'm playing right now in my blind playthrough. Then we have the Bandit, which is the class that starts with a bow. So if you want to have a good ranged option, the Bandit is a very good one to have. One of the issues with the Bandit is it starts with a lot of arcane. So this means you get good magic finds, so like Discovery. But at the same time, these are stats that you could have placed somewhere else. You got 13 dexterity, which is pretty good, but you have very low strength. You also have pretty low endurance, so it's a decent starting class, but your melee option is going to be a dagger, so you're going to have to be reasonably experienced at sneaking around and backstabbing enemies, and you also have a shield that's not particularly good for blocking, it's more for parrying, but you get the bow. So, you know, if you want to start off with a bow, here it is. However, it's fairly easy to find the bow early in the game, so I wouldn't stress too much about starting with the bow, but you know, that's the hunter class. You want to start with that. Then you have the astrologer, which is going to be your spell casting class, like very basic mage type gameplay. He also has a decent amount of dexterity, so that just spells come out a little bit faster, I would imagine. It's got a lot of mind, which means a significant amount of mana. Starts with a staff as well as a dagger and a shield. The reason they give you a dagger and a shield is just, hey, did you run out of mana? Time to get backstabbing a couple of mobs, right? So that is the astrologer. Then you have the prophet, which is your faith caster. So whereas the astrologer is the intelligence caster, the prophet is the faith type caster. It's, again, this is pretty much standard. He starts with a spear and a really bad shield. Also has a talisman for casting his spells. So pretty standard stuff when it comes to faith caster. Then you have the samurai, which is actually a class that surprised me a little bit because you're going to be able to just start off with a katana. Now, I haven't really critted samurai yet, but usually katanas tend to come with bleeding, which is a pretty good stat. Samurai also has a bow. The shield that samurai has is not particularly good, but he starts off with a couple of flaming arrows as well, which is interesting. And he comes fully kitted with a full samurai armor. I don't know if this is more powerful than the vagabond armor that we have here, but, you know, it's probably bound to be more powerful than most of these other starting classes. So between him and the vagabond, you're going to start with a heavy plated armor. These are the two that you want to start with. It also comes with 12 vigor, 11 mind, so it's kind of like a build that can go multiple places. It's got a decent amount of strength. It's got more dexterity even, so that you can properly wield that bow. So pretty much an excellent starting class if you want to also use ranged combat. Then we have the prisoner, and for those of you that are looking at this, is like, oh, it's just like another spellcaster, right? Yes, it is a variation of a spellcaster. It's like a variation that is more attuned to melee combat. So this would be kind of like a spell sword type character, if that's what you want. You can see this starts with 14 dexterity, 14 intelligence. He's going to have an S-Stock as well, which is a thrusting weapon, which is usually pretty good. You got your 11 vigor, 12 mind, so you can sling a couple of spells. Got a decent amount of endurance. It actually has 11 strength, which is a little bit surprising for me, but that is going to give you a little bit more flexibility in terms of which weapons you can wield. Then we have the confessor, which is like a more melee-oriented version of the prophet class. So basically, you're going to be able to do faith incantations, but at the same time, you're going to be starting off with a more melee-oriented loadout, which is actually pretty good. I actually really like this class, and I particularly like the way that its armor looks, because it looks like it's light armor. It's got like a cloak to it. I'm a big fan of this class as a starting class, just because of the way that it looks, and not even just that, even just like the backstory of this class, which you can then see if you actually choose it when you are in the character creation menu. As you can see, it's got 12 strength and 12 dexterity, which means you basically have like a quality type build. It's got 14 faith, and it comes equipped with a healing spell, a healing incantation, I should say. So on top of all of your flasks, you're also going to be able to heal yourself using the incantation. So it comes with a lot of healing. That shield that you see right there also has 100 physical block, which is really good. And it comes with the sword as well. So this is a pretty good starter class as well. And then finally we have the Wretch, which is the basic, oh, you were so unlucky, you get nothing. You get a club and that's it. Now, you guys might be like, okay, so the Wretch is if you're looking to get challenged and stuff like that. And in a way, yes, but in another way, the Wretch actually has really good value for all of its stats if you take into account that, like, okay, so for instance, the Confessor starts at level 10 and it's got all of those stats, right? Well, this one at level 1 has 10 on every stat, so it's actually a pretty good value proposition for your stats, at least in my opinion. But personally, I started with the hero, but feel free to choose whatever you want. The Wretch can also adapt to become whatever you want. And at the end of the day, it's important to mention that no matter which class you pick, you can change every stat to, whatever the hell you want. So ultimately, these just decide kind of like your starting stats, as well as which gear you start with. That's it. Once you get into the game, you'll be able to completely customize it and do whatever the hell you want with it. It's just, this is going to be your starting play style, and as you move throughout the game, you're going to probably change it around to be something completely different. Now, once you actually start creating your class, you're going to be seeing here that, you know, there's a lot of stuff for you to customize, your age, there's the origin story of your class, which basically is which class do you want to play. You can change it here even after you pick it in the previous screen. And you can go into all kinds of like visual customization of your character, but let's just assume you figured all that stuff out already. There's going to be one option that is going to jump to your mind, which is the Keepsake. And you're like, what the hell is the Keepsake? Okay, so this is the gift, which is something that, it's an item that they let you choose for the beginning of your journey. So there are several options here, and I'm going to go over each and every one of them and tell you what they do. So the first one is the Crimson Amber Medallion. So this is going to increase your maximum hit points. It's okay. You can start with this. You can also find this in the game. So this is not like, oh, this is my only shot of getting this item. No, you can find this in the game, and you know, you can get more HP, but at the end of the day, it's like, this is not going to be super mega changing. Like sometimes it might allow you to suffer like one more hit in some specific situation, but it almost looks better than it actually is. Don't think of this as like, oh, I should definitely get the medallion because it's going to be the best thing ever, right? It's okay. The Lands Between Rune, this basically is what we used to call in Souls games hard souls. So this gives you a certain amount of runes. Runes is currency. Whenever you kill an enemy, you get runes. This is what you use to both level up as well as purchase items. So if you want to start, it's almost like, in other games, it's almost like gold. So if you want to start with a little bit of extra gold, you can get the Lands Between Rune. This rune in particular, in case you guys are wondering, gives you 3,000 runes, which is enough for you to like maybe get like 1 or 2 levels. I'm not exactly sure, depending on which class you start with as well. And also you can buy some items with this from a vendor if you want to. Then you have a Golden Seed. Now the Golden Seed is going to give you an additional flask. So you start with 4 flasks that you can choose between flasks for health or flasks for mana. You can redistribute this at any time. I'll show you guys how to do it in a bit. And if you get the Golden Seed instead of starting with 4, you can use this to reinforce your flasks and you will get 5. So that is the advantage of this. You start with 1 additional healing flask. The Fanged Imp Ashes, this gives you a summon of 2 small golems. I haven't really tested this summon out yet. This game is just so massive, I haven't had time to check everything out. But basically, you start the game with a summon. There are certain locations where you can summon these spirits, and, you know, they're going to help you out engage the enemies. They cost FP, so using this is going to limit the amount of spells you'll be able to cast during the fight where you use this. You also get cracked pots. I would not recommend this. This is a crafting material. Basically, you put stuff inside the pots, you throw them, then they explode, but they regenerate. So basically, whenever you use this, you recover the pots. So like, let's say you make a firebomb, you throw it, it explodes, and then you get the empty pot again so that you can put more stuff inside and throw it again. But you can buy this at vendors. It's fairly easy to get this very early on, so I would not recommend you to get this. There's the Stone Sword Keys. These are, basically there's going to be these imp statues throughout the world that you will find, and they will have like these white fog walls. You will use these to open those fog walls. They are limited, as in, you know, once you use them, they're gone forever. So use these wisely if you take these. These are a decent starting item if you're wondering. But you have to decide when to use them and whether or not it's going to be useful to use them early or later, but it's always going to be a little bit of a gamble. Then there's the Bewitching Branch. 5 sacred branches charged with beguiling power set to originate from the demigod Myquela. So these are basically charming things. So you can go up to an enemy. You can't use this on bosses, as you can imagine, but you can use it on like an enemy, and it will charm them to fight for you for a little bit. Actually, I think it might even be permanent. I don't know how long these last. I didn't test them too thoroughly. But yeah, you basically melee hit them with this. When you use this, your character does a melee hit. And if you land it on an enemy, that enemy becomes enchanted and fights for you. Then there's boiled prawns. These boost your physical damage negation. I haven't even tested these, to be honest, but, you know, I don't think they're going to be a particularly good choice to start. Then you have Shabriri's Woe. Now, this is a very interesting one. Shabriri's Woe is a talisman, and this is a talisman that you can keep equipped. And whenever you have this equipped, the monsters are going to chase you down more than other players if you're in multiplayer. So if you want to play a tank, this is actually an interesting idea. It's like, say you're playing with friends and you want to make a character that's like a beefy tank. This would be a good item for you to have. But anyway, those are the gifts that you have available to you. I'm going to leave you guys to make your own decisions because I feel like this is always a magical part. I just wanted to explain to you guys what each of the items does, and hopefully you guys understood it. Now, let's get into some more interesting things. Welcome to the Lands Between. This is where your adventure begins, and I'm going to be starting by teaching you what I consider to be one of the most important things. Some of you guys will already be aware of this, so bear with me, but we're going to be talking about weapon scaling, because this is an extremely important concept for anyone who is new to a Souls game. So as you can see right now, our character comes by default equipped with a broadsword. If you look at all of the things in the description of the broadsword, you're going to be seeing like, wow, that's a lot of numbers, Rurikhan. That's a whole lot of numbers. What do I care about any of this? And luckily we have a cursor here. Hopefully you guys can see it because it's a pretty small cursor. You can see it. That's right over attack power right here. So you can see that in here there's a description of what type of damage your sword is. So this is standard damage and piercing damage. So it depends on the move that you do. This is important because some enemies are more vulnerable to standard attacks. Others might be more vulnerable to piercing attacks. Square off, that is the description of the Ash of War that this item has by default. All of the weapons are going to have a specific Art of War associated with them, or sometimes they might have nothing associated with them. It depends on which weapon you have equipped. You have the FP cost of your Ash of War. Then you have your attack power, which is your physical attack power. Starts off at 117, and then it's got a plus 13. And you guys are like, what's the plus 13? That is the scaling part of the equation. Your item might also have magic damage, fire damage, lightning damage, holy damage. In this case, got nothing. And then there's critical damage as well. So critical is going to be a modifier. Some weapons have a higher critical modifier, depending on which type of weapon. Usually dexterity weapons will have better crit modifiers. So this will impact whenever you backstab an enemy or something like that. It'll deal more damage than another weapon. Now, one of the most important things for you to pay attention to, attribute scaling. So for instance, this sword scales D for strength and E for dexterity. Think of this like the American grading system, right? A is good, B is slightly worse, C is slightly worse, D is slightly worse, so on and so forth. So this one's got a D scaling in strength. These scalings can be changed by getting different Ashes of War assigned to them, but for now just pay attention to it and let's say, okay, I want to use this weapon, I really want to focus on using this weapon. How do I get to deal more damage? Well, if it scales with a D in strength, you want to get more strength. The more strength you get, the more this number over here is going to increase, because that is your main scaling thing. It also scales E with dexterity, which is a much lesser scaling, so I wouldn't focus too much on dexterity if you want to focus on this weapon, at least not for now. But, you know, that also tells you which attributes are required in order to equip this weapon. So you need 10 strength and dexterity, which we meet. If we didn't meet it, then the weapon would show up as red and it would deal less damage when you attack enemies. You would actually get a negative modifier on the scaling because you do not meet the requirements for equipping the weapon. So the game even lets you equip weapons that you're not qualified to use, but you're not going to deal damage with them. So keep in mind this attribute scaling, it's very important. So if you find a weapon that you like, you'll know which stats you have to invest in order to deal the most damage possible with that weapon. Now, another important thing that I want to touch on is if you click X X on a cross on a PlayStation controller, but it would be the A button on an Xbox controller. It'll let you go into like all the different items that you have. And an important thing that I feel like a lot of people might not even know about if you're starting this as your first Souls game is that you can then press square, or in the Xbox controller would be X, and it swaps over and it tells you details about the item. Why is this important? Because sometimes you learn things by reading item descriptions, things that can be related to lore, things that can be related to, you know, a million different things, right? To the description of the item. Why is the item important? It might describe to you buffs that you might get from the item. It also describes to you the Ash of War. So for instance, we get this one, which is Square Off. This skill starts with the sword held level, follow up with a normal attack to slash upwards through enemy's guard, or a strong attack to perform a running thrust. I'm going to show you guys this because that is the Ash of War of this particular weapon, right? So how do Ashes of War actually work? So, for starters, your Ash of War is always going to be based on your left-hand weapon because it's going to be using the L2 or the left trigger in order to decide what gets done. So we have to look at our shield because our shield is what we have on our left weapon. So our shield has the parry skill. So when we press L2, it's going to parry. So you don't get to do your Ash of War if you have your shield up, but you can two-hand your weapon and now you get to do the Ash of War. Right? Or you can also unequip your shield, and now you get to do the Ash of War. Basically, so long as that shield is in your hands, you're going to be doing parrying. But if you remove the shield, that was the Ash of War. I didn't follow up, so I didn't show you guys what the Ash of War actually does. But this is the Ash of War animation. I'll show you guys what that does in just a second here. Just be aware of that. In case you guys are wondering how I'm swapping between these, this is the D-pad. Press D-pad left, it swaps to a different weapon, which in this case, it's actually our miracle weapon, but we'll talk more about that in a bit. Now then, let's actually do the Ash of War while we're at it. An important thing about this game is how do you swap between two-handing and one-handing, because usually in previous games you just press triangle and it would swap, or Y in an Xbox controller and it would swap, and in this one, it doesn't. If you want to know the equivalent, you have to look at like because I play all of these games with controller, I'm sorry, if you want to know the keyboard equivalent, look at the hotkeys. But, you know, in this one, Y or triangle is going to be a modifier. So if you want a two-hand, you hold it down and you press which weapon do you want it, which hand do you want a two-hand. So if I want to two-hand my shield, which is in my left hand, I'm going to press the left bumper button. And now I'm two-handing my shield. You can bash with your shield if you want to. But it's interesting because this gives you the choice, which weapon do you want to two-hand? Now, if I want to two-hand my sword, I can press down on triangle or Y, and I press R1. And now it goes back to its default stance, but if you press it again, it's going to two-hand it. Okay, so you have to get used to triangle being a modifier to two-hand, which is not particularly intuitive early on, but I can tell you it becomes second nature really, really fast. So, if you two-hand, we now have access to the Ash of War. So let's go back into the Ash of War just to see what it does. So they said we're supposed to follow it up with either a normal attack or a heavy attack. So if you press L2 and then R1, this is your Ash of War, which is a special attack. It's different from the regular attacks of the sword. And this is, in particular, a guard break attack. So if you hit an enemy that is blocking, this is going to deal a lot of stamina damage. It might even break their guard, which then allows you to do a heavy punish. Now, this particular attack can also follow up with an R2, which does this thrusting attack, which is also very good. But those are the Ashes of War. Notice that whenever I do an Ash of War, on the top left-hand side, you will see the FP gauge diminish. This is that thing that is governed by the mind stat, like I told you. So if you get more mind, you'll be able to do these special attacks more often. But that is how you switch between two-handing and one-handing. It's triangle and R1 or Y and R1. And do remember, you can also do this on your left hand, which gives you a lot of possibilities for, you know, maybe having a different offhand weapon on there and doing something crazy. But now, I want to tell you guys a little bit about dual wielding, because this game has built-in power stance. I've talked about this in my review type video. But the way that power stance works is the moment you have two weapons of the same type equipped, if you attack with the left weapon, which would be the left bumper, it's going to do special attacks. Like, notice how it incorporates both of the swords in the attack. This is just by spamming L1 or the left bumper button, depending on which controller you're using. So you're basically in permanent power stancing so long as you equip weapons of the same type. This is only going to work if the weapons are of the same type, which that happens to be the case here because we have 2 broadswords that I purchased specifically for this video. If it is a different weapon type, obviously it's not going to work. Now, another thing, how do you cast spells? For those of you that have never played a Souls game, I mean, this one's fairly obvious, but you have something which is a spell tool. In our case, we have this finger seal, which is equipped. And you can swap between it using the D-pad. The D-pad, by the way, cycles through which weapons you have equipped here. So D-pad right would cycle through the weapons that you have equipped on your right weapon. D-pad left would cycle through the weapons you have equipped on your left weapon, on your left hand. So, considering that we have the shield and the seal here equipped on the left weapon, we can pop that up, and now we have the seal in our hands. You can see that our hand is glowing because we are holding the special seal. Now you can see that on the top, on the bottom left-hand side, there is something at the top which you can cycle through by using the up D-pad, which are the 2 spells that we have equipped. We have Urgent Heal, we have Assassin's Approach. We can use Urgent Heal by basically pressing the R1 button. And if we had taken damage, this would have healed us. Also notice that it used up a significant chunk of our mana. Okay? That's how spell casting works. That's kind of like the basics. You guys now know about dual wielding as well. And you know that you can dual wield, do the power stancing moves by pressing left bumper. So there you go. That's how that stuff works. I would now like to call your attention to a new shortcut type that we have available in the game. Now, if you guys noticed, we have our menu on the bottom left. This is hiding automatically because I have the UI set to dynamic. We can cycle through the items there. But there's a special type of shortcut that we have now, which is when we press triangle, which is the thing that triangle or Y, which allows us to basically swap between two-handing and one-handing, it gives us a different menu on the bottom left. That menu is accessed if you press the start button over here on the right side. It's called the pouch. You guys can't actually see it properly because my face is in the way. I can move it for a bit so that you guys can watch. Oh, let's go ahead and take that. You guys can see that it says pouch right there. And pouch, as you can see, also has assigned to it 4 different D-pad icons. So basically, let's say, for instance, we go over here and we press Y or triangle, and we select the spectral steed whistle. That means that now, when I hold down on triangle, my spectral steed is going to be on the up D-pad icon. And I can summon it without having to cycle through my potions. So you can keep your Flask of Crimson Tears permanently selected, and you can still summon your horse without a problem. Dismounting from your horse, by the way, you can do it by pressing R3. Not R3, L3, sorry. Your left stick. And as you can see, you can even dismount the steed and do a jumping attack. Which is pretty good, if you ask me. Now, while we're on the topic of this, let's go ahead and rest at this particular side of grace. These work like your bonfires. And in here, I can tell you guys about flasks. Now, there is a menu specifically for flasks that allows you to upgrade the flasks by adding charges to it, which requires a golden seed, which is one of the gifts that I told you guys could get. So if you use the golden seed, you can increase your flasks. I don't have any golden seeds. You can also increase the amount replenished by flasks by items that you find throughout the world, which are like, it's this cup-looking thing. I forget what the name of it is. And you can also change your flask charges. So if you're like heavy into spell casting, you can get yourself more FP flasks. And these will replenish your FP and allow you to cast more spells. But naturally, you're sacrificing more health flasks. So you have to choose, how do I want to play? Do I want to have more mana flasks? Do I want to have more health flasks? You can choose this right from the beginning. We're at the very first bonfire. And, you know, we can choose how to do this stuff here. Okay? Now, another important thing is also notice how there's a little gate symbol right now on the left side of the screen. You can see it. It's right below that character dressed in white, all the way to the left. That little blue gate symbol means that in this area, I'm allowed to summon spirits. Usually, whenever there's like a big boss fight or something like that, you will be able to summon spirits. So let's actually assign a spirit in this new shortcut here of the pouch. We're going to be assigning a spirit that I have, which are wolves. You get these fairly early in the game. So we assign the wolves there, and considering that we're in the spirit summoning location, we can just hold down triangle or Y, then we press right on D-pad. Now I have these 3 wolves that will do battle alongside me. You can see their health pools and all of that jazz. You can't use this during multiplayer. This is a single player only thing. I just wanted to summon them so that you guys can see how this stuff works. Let's talk about Grace Guidance. So if you look at the bonfire here, you'll notice that there is a line pointing you towards a certain direction. Now the reason behind this is because this is an open world game, and this is their first open world game, so they want to give you at least a little bit of guidance, because otherwise you could be roaming the lands between for hours upon hours upon hours and not really find the paths of progression. So this is like, if you want a beeline progression, you can consider these basically the markers for your main quest. They give you a general idea of where you're supposed to be heading. Now if we open up our map, which is done by touching the touchpad on your controller if you're playing on PlayStation, or pressing the back button on Xbox, and there you go. You can see that. You can actually see the guidance of grace going between these different sites of lost grace, which is basically, like I said, these work kind of like bonfires. And as you can see, this one points you towards this one, then this one points you towards this one, and this one points you over here. So they don't just guide you on a beeline straight to your target. They guide you to like checkpoints along the way. So if you want to focus on, finishing the main quest line, these are things that you want to follow. If, on the other hand, you just want to go ahead and explore the world, you're free to do that as well. Okay, I moved this to a different location because I want to show you something that I think is going to be important for your travels in the lands between, and that is finding maps. So if you open up your map, like I told you earlier, you'll notice that this is not a particularly detailed map. It's got a couple of points that you found along the way, like I found this coastal cave here, I found this church, I found the first step, which is where I was, and I found a couple of more sites of lost grace, but I haven't really done much because this is a brand new character that I created just for the purpose of doing this tutorial. And you might be like, okay, so how do I go about actually fleshing out this map? Well, the map doesn't even start like this. The map starts like all foggy and stuff, and it starts filling out as you explore it. Now, an important thing as you explore the map is that you'll eventually run into something that looks like this. Now, there is a ruin icon in here because I've already been to this ruin. It's almost impossible not to tag this ruin in preparation of this video, so I apologize for that. But there will be a little thing that is marked on the map, which is this symbol right here. I want you to pay attention to that because as you explore different sections of the map, you will always see this. And you might be wondering, what the hell is that? Well, this tells you where you can find the detailed map for the zone that you're in. So this, as you can imagine, is a particularly important mark. Now, another thing that you can do with the map functionality here is there is a marking functionality that allows you to put a pillar of light into the world so that you can set yourself a bearing. So for instance, say I put a pillar of light here by pressing, not this one, by pressing the X button or the A button, depending on, which controller you're using, and it'll place this marker, right? A beacon, so to speak. You can see right there on the bottom left-hand side, A, place beacon. If we now go into the world, you can see the beacon is there. A little beacon of blue light, which is cool. Because if you see something in the map that you think is interesting, that you want to go check out, you can place a beacon there and you can go there later to explore it. But, say for instance, okay, I'm trying to find the map to this zone, and you spot this symbol right here, and you're like, oh, maybe I'll put a marker right there. Boom. Now, you have a marker in a general location where you should be able to find the map. But, as you can see, it is in the middle of a bunch of enemy troops. So, let's say we just want to sneak in there, because this game also features stealth. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to call the horse just to get us a little bit closer. But now I'm going to jump off. I'm going to press on L3, or the left stick, and and your character crouches down. And now you're in stealth mode. It's much harder for enemies to spot you if you are like this, which allows me to basically sneak up on this guy, backstab him, and his friend over there with the torch barely noticed it. And we can go back to hiding over here, and you can see that he hit his sword and he's not alert at all. So you can play kind of like solid snake mode if you want to. I'm not exactly sure how much like heavy armor is going to affect the stealth level of your character, but so far I've been stealthing on a lot of different situations with my own main character, and it's been a really viable way to play the game. And as you can see, dude didn't see us. He's now moving away. We're going to backstab him too. And that's 2 of them down. But I'm not here to just like backstab every single one of these enemies, so let's try to focus on finding the thing we came for, which is the map. If you look there, there's a little structure over there in the middle that kind of resembles the little pillar thing that we saw in the map. I'm going to remove the thing, right? That pillar seems oddly familiar right there. That is where your map is going to be, and at least so far from the maps that I've picked up, which I think I picked up 3 maps so far. Maybe 4, not exactly sure. They've always been in something like that. I'm assuming that later in the game they might show up in different ways, or maybe it'll always be something like that. But basically, we're going to go ahead and sneak around, and we're going to go try to get that real quick. I mean, you can also just mount your horse and just brazenly charge in here and be like, hey, excuse me, I'm just here to get this map, and now I'm leaving. Bye-bye. But now we have the map of Limgrave West. Which, let me just move away to safety here. We should be fairly safe at this point. And now that we have this map, we can open up the map, and you can see a new map has been found, and it reveals the entirety of the area for that map. So this is not the whole map. As you can see, the whole map is significantly larger. But, you know, it gives us a good idea of everything that we can find. And also, you'll want to pay attention to specific things that you find in the world. Like, say, for instance, doesn't this look interesting? You might want to check that out when you get to the final game. There might be something that takes place there. Let's take a look at another one. Doesn't this look interesting? Looks like some kind of ruins. You might want to check that out too. So basically, you look at the map, and you basically try to find points of interest, and those are things that you might want to explore. And as always, remember, you can tag things using the marker system by basically pressing cross on PlayStation or X on the Xbox controller. For instance, look at this thing. What is this thing? This thing looks really cool, doesn't it? Let's go ahead and mark that. It's over there. Let's go ahead and do a little visit. Another thing that you can do is you can do mounted combat, which I'm not particularly good at doing, if I'm going to be completely honest. But I'm going to slap this guy around a little bit. You can do charge attacks by holding R2. Actually, the sword can't do charge attacks, apparently. It's still a little bit awkward to me to do mounted combat. I'm not particularly good at it, so bear with me here. Not to mention, I'm not used to this weapon. I play with axes. And after somebody falls, usually you get to do a critical attack on them, but whatever. So, we got him. He's dead. Now, I spotted that around here, there should have been something. Oh, there it is. Hello. Notice that in the map, there's a symbol of like a telescope type thing. This is a Birdseye Telescope. The reason I pointed it out is because this lets you actually survey the area quite a bit, which is nice. Gives you an idea of things to look forward to. Like, what could that be? You can press up and down on the D-pad to zoom in and out of things. That right there is, I think this is called a minor Earth tree. I'm not sure. There's a tower over there in the distance. Could be interesting. Unfortunately, you can't mark things while on this, but you can mark them in the map if you can estimate the distance at which they are, and then, you know, a pillar of light will show up. But it's a good way to survey an area and get an idea of what to expect from your journeys ahead. Now, another thing that I wanted to bring up is as you traverse through the world, you'll eventually run into these guys. These are wandering merchants, and they will sell you things. So, an important thing is, not only they can, I'm going to skip the dialogue because I don't want to give you guys too much story stuff. Not only you can buy things from them, you can also sell things to them for runes. So, like, you can actually just straight up sell stuff that you don't want. Like, hey, you don't want this broadsword? Sell it to them for 100 because you already have one and you're not interested in dual wielding, right? Although, don't do that. I spent like 1,800 runes on this sword just to make this video, all right? Anyway, you can sell stuff to them, which is pretty cool. But on top of it, a couple of things that I wanted to point out. This first one, this is going to be probably be the first one that you find. He's going to be selling you a crafting kit. You'll want to buy this. This allows you to like craft certain items, like you can craft arrows, you can craft fire bombs, you can craft all kinds of stuff. And if you remember, there were the crackpots that you could choose to get as a gift. You can just straight up buy them in here, and they're not even that expensive. A couple of important things, though. There are tips that they sell you. So this one gives you knowledge about waypoint ruins. This one gives you knowledge on the Flask of Wanderer's Physique, which I'm assuming is going to be how the Flask of Wanderer's Physique works or where you can find it potentially. I don't know. I've never actually bought this tip. But these basically will show up on your inventory, and then you can look at them. The tips that I've bought were on enemies specifically, and it gave me tips on how to deal with certain enemies. He also sells a torch that you might consider purchasing because there are several areas in this game that are actually really dark. He sells an armor that you might consider buying if you started the game as a wretch. And he also sells you these cookbooks. Cookbooks are essentially stuff that expands your crafting repertoire. So these are things to consider. Telescope, also something to consider. Allows you to, you know, look a little bit further in the distance. But yeah, make sure to always check the stock of these dudes because you might find interesting things. So whenever you find one of these guys, make sure to check what he has for sale because it might be interesting for you. Now, another thing that I want to touch up on, and we're coming very close to the end, this video is already way longer than I initially intended, is that as you explore the world, you will find caves that can potentially lead to dungeons. You'll notice that there is a like blue barrier there. This means that if you cross this, the horse disappears because you're not allowed to go inside dungeons with your horse. And you'll notice that there is a side of grace. Now, the reason I'm pointing this out is because whenever you find a cave, there is a high chance that shortly after you go inside the cave, you'll find a site of lost grace. This is something that you'll want to keep in mind in case you want to register sites of lost grace to make fast traveling easier out in the world. Now, when you're inside dungeons, you can't teleport out, but notice that the second I step outside of the dungeon, I can teleport. You'll be able to teleport to this cave. Another important thing is you might consider marking some of the caves that you find, because like usually these dungeons, if you keep progressing through them, you'll eventually face against the boss. So there might be some puzzles involved, there might be, you know, a couple of enemies that you fight along the way, but usually at the end of these dungeons, you will find the boss. These are like mini dungeons, mini adventures that you go on, and they are optional. My advice to you would be if you find one, but, you know, you're busy doing exploration or whatever, and you feel like you're going to be coming back to this dungeon later, I would recommend that you place a marker on it, which you can do by pressing X on your Xbox controller or square on your PlayStation controller. And you can choose a marker to put in here and just basically mark this one as in, I didn't do this one yet. And you'll want to mark the ones you haven't done yet, because I don't think there's going to be enough markers to mark all of the ones that you have done. And you can put these markers on different places. Like I said, it's like, oh, maybe I'll want to go here at some point, right? Oh, I'll place a marker here. Or, hey, this thing was really cool. I'll place a marker here too. And you get to have these markers on your map, which you can use as reference to your journeys and stuff like that. So for this next part, we're going to be talking about multiplayer, and I brought in my main character because I already have, I think, most of the multiplayer items that you can use in order to summon other players and do all of that stuff. But before we talk about the items themselves, I'd like to call your attention to the statue on the right of my character, which is on the left of the screen, this thing over here. Whenever you find these, make sure to interact with them. You'll have the option to interact with them using the Y button on your Xbox controller or the triangle button on the PlayStation controller. These will be spread throughout multiple zones throughout the world, usually before a boss fight or in a dungeon or something like that. And basically interact with them, because otherwise they don't become active. If you just pass them by and not interact with them, they're not going to become active and they're not going to be usable for the items that we're going to be talking about in this section. So if we go to our inventory, at the very bottom here, you'll find the multiplayer items. The very first one being the Furl Calling Finger Remedy. So these work kind of like your Humanities and other Souls games, where basically you use one of these and then you'll be able to summon other players into your world. As you can imagine, if you're someone who's played Souls before, using one of these also opens you up to being invaded by other players. These two always go hand in hand. If you want to do jolly cooperation, you're also opening yourself up for potential PvP, and personally I wouldn't have it any other way. I know that some people don't like that that's the way the game works, but it is what it is. So this is going to be something very important if you want to engage in multiplayer. If you want to summon other players, you're going to be needing Furl Calling Finger Remedy. You'll be able to buy this sometimes from vendors. You'll be able to find it in places and whatnot. And I think you might even get it rewarded for doing multiplayer sessions. But I haven't really done any multiplayer yet because I want to do my first playthrough completely offline. But anyways, that is what this thing is for. Then you have the Tarnished Furled Finger. This is your basic soapstone. For those of you that don't know how this works, this puts a summon sign in the world that another player will be able to see, and they will be able to summon you. There's also like a functionality that you can use in the options menu, which lets you set up a password, which would be in the network section. I'm currently in Play Offline, but there will be an option for you to set like a matchmaking password. And you use that option, and basically anyone that's using the same matchmaking password as you is going to make it easier for you to find the summoning signs of those players, or them to find your summoning sign. The password does not prevent people from invading you in PvP. It also does not limit people to only invade on people with the same password. PvP is intended to be random, so but this is basically your basic summon soapstone sign, just like you've had in previous Souls games. The difference in this one is you got the small golden effigy as well, and this one works differently. Instead of you dropping your summon sign in one location in the world, what this one does is it drops it into any of these statues that you've unlocked in any given zone. Now, I don't believe that this is a worldwide thing. I can't open my map because this character has the map way too revealed. I made that mistake before and I've had to edit that out. But I believe that this is going to be limited to the stakes that you've unlocked in a specific area. So say, for instance, in this area, I found like 5 dungeons and I've unlocked all of the summoning pools of those dungeons. If I was to use this item, it will put my summon sign on all of those summoning pools, thus increasing the chances of you being summoned. Now, this right here, the Duelist's Furled Finger, this is the same thing as this one. Difference is if somebody summons you with this one, basically you're going to be summoned for a PvP match. Usually these are used for duels because people will clearly see, okay, so this is a PvP guy who wants to do PvP. Sometimes they might summon you just to kill you. It is what it is. And as you can imagine, the small red effigy does the same thing as the golden effigy, but for duels instead of cooperation. So if you want to find people that want to duel with you, you'll use this one. Then you have the Festering Bloody Finger. What does this one do? This one, for starters, is limited. As you can see, we only have 3 of them. I'm assuming you'll find one that'll be permanent later in the game. But this allows you to invade another player's world. So you do this, it's going to look for a player that has used one of these Furl Calling Finger remedies, and it is going to try and invade into their world. Keep in mind, they might have other players there with them, so, that might happen. Then there is the Taunter's Tongue. This basically allows you to, it increases the chances of you being invaded by other players. And it enables the arrival of more than one invader into your world. So you can basically use this if you want to engage in PvP. And if somebody uses this and you use this, there's a high chance that, you two are going to be fighting each other. Although if you're setting up a duel, it'd be much easier to use the Furled Finger. Then there's the Finger Severer. Let's say you summon somebody to do co-op with you and you're not particularly pleased about it. You can use this, get rid of them. And then finally, there's the Tarnished Wizened Finger, and this allows you to actually leave messages out in the world for other players to see. Like, say you discover a trap, you find an illusory wall, you might leave a message behind to guide other players behind you. But that is the multiplayer aspect of the game with the items that I've unlocked so far. I'm sorry, I know that the multiplayer section of this video is a little bit scuffed because I personally haven't done a whole lot of multiplayer in Elden Ring yet. But that is the guide. Hopefully this helped you out. If it did, make sure to leave a like because it helps the video reach more people, more Tarnished that could potentially use this guidance. Thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Subscribe so that you can stay notified to my blind playthrough that's going to be hitting the channel today. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe. Peace out.